Islam was now without a religious leader, its resources plundered, and almost all its territory conquered. It seemed on the brink of extinction. But for Eastern Christians, it was a time of hopeful anticipation. They had lived under Muslim rule for some 6 centuries. The Crusaders had failed to liberate them. Now perhaps the Mongols would. This was their fervent hope. Meanwhile, there were other witnesses. With every dawn, the Crusader knights looked out from the ramparts of Crac des Chevaliers. Would the new day bring sight of the advancing Mongols? For months, they'd watched while the traditional enemy, Islam, crumbled around them. Now, the Crusaders had no idea how to respond. So the castle vaults were stocked against any eventuality. It was a time to watch and wait. It could be that Jerusalem was next along the inexorable route of the Mongols. Who knew? But it might once again be restored to the Christians. Across the Holy Land, the Eastern Christians pressed for an alliance with the Mongols. They hoped that, with Mongol help, they might regain the freedom and status taken from them by Islam. But the Crusaders, who had come from Europe, were not so sure. The problem was that no one knew what the Mongols intended. There have always been some dilemmas for which worship and prayer do not provide clear solutions. In fact, Hulagu had no specific designs on Jerusalem. To him, there were other more important goals. He had already made most of the Middle East his own empire, and now set his sights on the last remaining bastion of Islamic power in the Middle East, beyond Jerusalem. Egypt was an important Islamic power. It was controlled by the Mameluke sultans, former Turkish slaves who had seized power in 1250. After Baghdad, Cairo was the most important capital in Islam. The Mamelukes had come to power because they were easily the most formidable warriors in all the Middle East, and they had ambitions to consolidate their power in the region. They were also empire builders, and their architectural legacy in Egypt was, and still is, magnificent. As the last bastion of Islam, there was in Egypt much to protect. Indeed, the Mameluke Sultan, Qutuz, had already declared his intention of defeating the Mongols. Though the Mamelukes were numerically no match for Hulagu's armies, as soldiers they were equal to the Mongols, and they knew it. So they did not panic when envoys arrived from Hulagu carrying a familiar Mongol message.
We have already conquered a vast empire. It is for you to fly and for us to pursue. Our horses are swift, our arrows sharp, and our hearts as hard as the mountains. Your walls, your fortresses will not detain us. We mean well by our warning. You are at present the only enemy against whom we must march.
But before the Mamelukes could react, news was brought from afar that dramatically changed the situation. Hulagu's brother Munke, the great Khan, had died. So the Mongol throne was vacant, and the succession was under dispute. Hulagu's armies checked their advance and reined back until the leadership problems in far-off Mongolia were resolved. Just as Ogadai Khan's death 20 years earlier had saved Christian Europe from a Mongol conquest, now the death of Munka would save what remained of Islam. Some of Hulagu's huge command was quartered in areas of good pasture, but most was spread across the desert of Syria. So, while he waited for news from home, Hulagu had no option but to withdraw much of his army to the better pastures of Persia. He left behind a small garrison force to hold his Syrian frontier against the Mamelukes. The vastness of Syria was to be held by a mere 10,000 men. In Cairo, when news of the Mongol withdrawal reached the Mameluke Sultan, he ordered that Hulagu's envoys be executed and their severed heads displayed here at Cairo's city gates. Then he decided to venture north to attack the Mongols. In a passionate speech, he reminded his soldiers that the defense of Islam now rested on them alone. He sent messengers north to Crac des Chevaliers and other Crusader strongholds, urging that they join forces in attacking the Mongols in Syria, or, at least, that the Crusaders should allow the Mamelukes safe passage past their castles. The thought of cooperating with Islam posed an ironic dilemma for the Christian knights. It was the most crucial decision they'd faced since they had set foot in the Holy Land. With whom should they be allied? The Mamelukes, their Muslim enemy, were fighting to survive. And if the Crusaders joined forces with the Mongols, they might, between them, eliminate Islam forever. But the Mongols' invasion of Europe was not forgotten. A victory for those savages would mean abject slavery for the Crusaders. In the end, the Crusaders sided with the devil they knew. They supplied the Mamelukes with provisions and granted them safe passage through Christian territory. The Mamelukes and a depleted Mongol force converged at a place called Ain Jalut. The battle fought here in September 1260 was a turning point in the history of the Mongols, the Muslims, and the Christians. The larger Mameluke army overran the Mongols. It was the first time the Devil's Horsemen had been stopped, defeated. Ain Jalut means Goliath's spring, and tradition has it that it was here that David slew his giant. Anyway, it was here that the myth of Mongol invincibility was shattered for good. The spell the great Genghis Khan had cast upon the world was broken. But in the ashes of Ain Jalut lay not only the ruined prestige of the Mongols. The Crusaders' decision to let their enemies fight it out was, in the end, disastrous, though the end was some time coming. "30 years after their victory at Ain Jalut, the Mamelukes returned to remove the Christians. One by one, the Crusader castles fell. Crac des Chevaliers was one of the last to go. The victorious Mamelukes engraved their exploits deep into the castle walls. The Crusader presence in the Middle East had been brought to an end. The great Mongol army, led by Hulagu, settled here in northern Persia. As a physical symbol of their intentions, they built this stronghold called Takht-e-Suleiman. It was built around a deep blue lake, which the Mongols believed was a holy place. But what was more important was the great destroyers of walls had now become builders of walls.